Good morning.
Hello.
How are you?
Um, Very well. Are you all in the
Back from the
mountains?
back from the mountains?
Yes, back in the mountains.
Must be nice.
Good morning, my dear.
Hi. Good morning.
So nice
So
to
I
see
was
you.
I was actually just discussing, sorry? Yeah.
So nice to see you after long break.
Yes. I was just discussing with some of us here whether you would like to continue with the essays on the Gita before taking up the text, or would you like to do it simultaneously or pause on chapter 10, which is the yoga, after the yoga of the intelligent will, and then take up the shlokas with the, Sanskrit shlokas and the Sri Aurobindo's explanations after the shloka, as in the book, the Gita in the vision and the words of Sri Aurobindo? Or would you like to continue with just the reading without the shlokas? What is the sense here? That this is a very committed group, especially the ones that are attending today, because they've made sure they come back even though there's been a break. Often a break means a break for a lot of people who are casual attendees. But so you tell me, what would you like? Do you think the best thing to do is?
I
Jayashree,
mostly
would you
like
Yeah,
like?
readings.
Sorry?
um,
I like the readings and
You
the
like to continue the
explanation.
book, not with
Yeah,
the shlokas.
I am not 100% sure. Yeah. I think
Okay.
I
I'm
like
leaning
the shloka.
toward the
I like
book.
the
Shlokas?
Yeah,
I
Jayashree,
like
your
yeah, I would like to do the shlokas
hmm
because I think the explanation goes side by side, and then we can refer to the book if something comes up. Just a thought, but whatever
right.
the group
I'm
decides.
I'm easy.
So no, when I say, would you like to do it? So should we pause after the first, after the framework, which is made, the first 10 chapters of the essays on the Gita, have the framework of the Gita up to the yoga of the intelligent will. And then should we go back, or should we now go back to the first chapter and catch up on the shlokas until we reach where we are in the text?
I think if we could just do the reading today, because it has been
Okay,
a long break,
okay.
and then we can do
Next time.
shloka next time,
Okay.
because that will be very important also to do shloks.
So you think so? Most of you want to do both, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah, I'd
right?
agree with that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
hmm
So what we will then do is, hi, Anuradha, you've come. Right. So Anuradha is here today. Not the Anuradha you know. Anuradha, the Sanskrit, the teacher.
Oh,
And I'd
I
asked her to
remember her.
come. Sorry?
I remember her.
Yeah. So she's here to just, what I was going to do with her is that for her to do the Sanskrit shlokas, and then for me to read the English explanation, and then to go through the shlokas together. But she's here today, I think, just to attend the class. We will start it from next time. Besides, I think that, you see, the next two chapters, Sankhya and Yoga, are very Sankhya, Yoga, and Vedanta. They're extremely philosophical, extremely important, very, very important concepts on the differentiation between Sankhya, Yoga, and most people, including myself, were very confused about what these are until one reads the clarity with which Sri Aurobindo puts these concepts across. So I do think they're very important, but they are not directly sort of relevant to the text, except as a kind of a framework and a background of how the Gita approaches yoga and the differentiation between the yoga of the Gita and the yoga of the Sankhyas and the yoga of the and Patanjali's yoga. So there are three yogas there. There's Patanjali's yoga, there's the Gita yoga of the Gita, and then there's the Sankhya yoga. Hello. Okay, so we'll do this chapter then. So let's start with a concentration, and then 5 to 3 minutes of music. We finished last time the chapter on the creed of the Aryan fighter, chapter 7. Today we take up chapter 8, Sankhya and Yoga. In the moment of his turning from this first and summary answer to Arjuna's difficulties, and in the very first words which strike the keynote of a spiritual solution, the teacher makes at once a distinction which is of utmost importance for the understanding of the Gita. The distinction of Sankhya and Yoga. Such, in quotation marks, this is what Sri Krishna says, such is the intelligence, the intelligent knowledge of things and will. Such is the intelligence declared to thee in the Sankhya. Hear now this in the Yoga. For if thou art in Yoga by this intelligence, O son of Pritha, thou shalt cast away the bondage of work. That is the literal translation of the words in which the Gita announces the distinction it intends to make. So this distinction between Sankhya and Yoga. The Gita is in its foundation a Vedantic work. The Gita is in its foundation a Vedantic work. It is one of the three recognized authorities for the Vedantic teaching. And although not described as a revealed scripture, although, that is to say, it is largely intellectual, ratiocinative, philosophical in its method, founded indeed on the truth, but not the directly inspired word, which is the revelation of the truth through the higher faculties of the seer, it is yet so highly esteemed as to be ranked almost as a 13th Upanishad. So here he clearly states that the Gita, being a Vedantic work, is distinguished from revealed scripture. Do you know which Vedantic work is a revealed scripture? The Vedas and the Upanishads, because they are by the seers, they are the direct word. So, although it is not revealed scripture, because it is largely intellectual, philosophical, ratiocinative, which is, it goes through a rational process and logic, which is the revelation, but still it is based on the revelation of the truth through the, but not the directly inspired word, which is the revelation of the truth through the higher faculties of the seer, it is yet so highly esteemed as to be ranked as the 13th Upanishad. But still its Vedantic ideas are throughout and thoroughly colored by the ideas of the Sankhya and the Yoga way of thinking. And it derives from this coloring the peculiar synthetic character of its philosophy. It is, in fact, primarily a practical system of yoga that it teaches and it brings in metaphysical ideas only as explanatory of its practical system. So it is basically a practical system of yoga. Now that's very important because if you read the Vedas or the Upanishads, you will not see that practicality that emanates from the Gita there. However, it's a practical system of yoga that it teaches and it brings in metaphysical ideas only as explanatory of its practical system. nor does it merely declare Vedantic knowledge, but it founds knowledge and devotion upon work, even as it uplifts works to knowledge, their culmination, and informs them with devotion as their very heart and kernel of their spirit. Again, its yoga is founded upon the analytical philosophy of the Sankhyas, takes that as a starting point, and always keeps it as a large element of its method and doctrine. But still it proceeds far beyond it, negatives even some of its characteristic tendencies, and finds a means of reconciling the lower analytical knowledge of Sankhya with the higher synthetic and Vedantic truths. So this being very important, one, that the understanding of the Gita, the distinction of Sankhya and Yoga, and that basically the Gita starts from, is really a practical yoga and a practical system of yoga which uses metaphysical ideas to explain and to understand its practicality. What then are the Sankhya and Yoga of which the Gita speaks? Now, this is very important. This question, what is the Sankhya and the Yoga system of which the Gita is talking about? They are certainly not the systems which have come down to us under these names as enunciated respectively in the Sankhya Karika of Ishvara Krishna and the Yoga aphorisms of Patanjali. Now, this is the most important statement here. The Sankhya and the Yoga of the Gita are not the Sankhya system that has come down to us in the Hindu philosophy, Indian philosophical systems of the Sankhya Karika or the Ishvara Krishna and Patanjali's aphorisms. This Sankhya is not the system of the Karikas, at least as that is generally understood. For the Gita, nowhere for a moment admits the multiplicity of Purushas as a primal truth of being, and it affirms emphatically what the traditional Sankhya strenuously deny, the one as self and Purusha. That one again as the Lord, Ishvara or Purushottam, and Ishvara as the cause of the universe. The traditional Sankhya is, to use our modern distinctions, atheistic. The Sankhya of the Gita admits and subtly reconciles the atheistic, pantheistic, and monistic views of the universe. So the traditional Sankhya is atheistic. There are a multiplicities of Purushas in that, and the explanation follows later, so I won't go into it. And the Sankhya of the Gita admits and subtly reconciles both the theistic, pantheistic, that is the one, the many, and the monistic. Monistic is what? Building, yeah, the energy behind. Views of the universe. It's not a God, but it's what you call the one universal one or whatever. So all the theistic, that is one God, pantheistic, and monistic. So all these three is what the Gita does. Nor is this yoga the yoga system of Patanjali. Now this is very important because normally when we say yoga, especially when, of course, when you're talking about the practice of yoga, the Patanjali is the most, most read text of yoga. But here in the Gita, it is not the yoga system of Patanjali, but that is a purely subjective method of Raja Yoga. Purely subjective method. An internal discipline, limited, rigidly cut out, severely and scientifically graded by which the mind is progressively stilled and taken up into samadhi, so that we may gain the temporal and eternal results of this self-exceeding. The temporal is a great expansion of the soul's knowledge and powers, the eternal in the divine union. But the yoga of the Gita. So first understand what is Patanjali's yoga. Patanjali's yoga is firstly very fixed. It's very strenuous. It is scientifically graded to do what? To still the mind, to make the mind absolutely quiet and to go into samadhi. Now, many people, even in Sri Aurobindo in the Mother's Yoga, that's why Sri Aurobindo has taken the trouble to write the essays on the Gita, because see, his own yoga is so much based on
Uh-oh, did she freeze? Or is it me?
Yeah, no, I think her internet
I'll
froze.
just text her.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Mita, you're frozen if you can hear us. Probably all that cool air from the mountains. No, it's gonna come back in.
Rohini, take up the thread.
She'll come.
Audio and video. We got it on one spot. Okay.
You
Can
can
we hear me?
Ah.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah,
you? We can't
I've come
see
back.
you. We can hear you, but we
You
can't
can't see me? Can you hear me?
There you are. Now we
I
can
think
do
yeah. Okay,
weak connection. No?
right.
Yeah, we lost the
Yeah.
connection about
So
3,
let's
4
just continue
minutes.
reading. Yeah, so I stopped and we'll continue from there.
Okay.
So that we may gain the temporal and eternal results of this self-exceeding, the temporal in a great expansion of the soul's knowledge and powers, the eternal in the divine union. But the yoga of the Gita is a large, flexible, and many-sided system with various elements, which are all successfully harmonized by a sort of natural and living assimilation. These elements, Raja Yoga is only one, not the most important and vital. This yoga, strict and scientific gradation, but is a process of natural soul development. It seeks, by the adoption of a few principles of subjective poise and action, to bring about a renovation of the soul and a sort of change, ascension or new birth, out of the lower nature into the divine. Accordingly, its idea of samadhi is quite different from the ordinary notion of the yogic trance. And while Patanjali gives to works only an initial importance for moral purification and religious concentration, the Gita goes so far as to make works the distinctive characteristic of yoga. Action to Patanjali is only a preliminary. In the Gita, it is a permanent foundation. So here we read immediately the difference between Patanjali's yoga and the yoga of the Gita. In Patanjali, samadhi is a yogic trance. In Gita, while Patanjali gives works only an initial importance for moral purification, religious concentration, the Gita goes on to make it a distinctive characteristic of yoga. Action to Patanjali is only a preliminary action. It is a permanent foundation. In the Raja Yoga, it has practically to be put aside when its result has been attained, or at any rate ceases very soon to be a means for the yoga. For the Gita, it is a means of the highest ascent and continues even after the complete liberation of the soul. So, is that clear? Any questions there or any comments? The difference between Patanjali and the Gita's yoga? Okay. This much has yet to be said in order to avoid any confusion of thought that might be created by the use of familiar words in a connotation wider than the technical sense now familiar to us. Still, all that is essential in the Sankhya and Yoga systems, all in them that is large, Catholic, and universally true, is admitted by the Gita, even though it does not limit itself by them, like the opposing schools. Its Sankhya is the Catholic and Vedantic Sankhya, such as we find it in its first principles and elements in the great Vedantic synthesis of the Upanishads and in the later developments of the Puranas. Its idea of yoga is that large idea of a principally subjective practice and inner change necessary for the finding of the self or the union with God, of which the Raja Yoga is only one special application. The Gita insists that Sankhya and Yoga are not two different, incompatible, and discordant systems, but one in their principle and aim. They differ only in their method and starting point. The Sankhya also is a yoga, but it proceeds by knowledge. It starts, that is to say, by intellectual discrimination and analysis of the principles of our being, and attains its aim through the vision and possession of the truths. Yoga, on the other hand, proceeds by work. It is, in its first principle, karma yoga. But it is evident from the whole teaching of the Gita and its later definitions that the word karma is used in a very wide sense, and that by yoga is meant the selfless devotion of all the inner as well as the outer activities, and as a sacrifice to the Lord of all works, offered to the Eternal as master of all the soul's energies and austerities. Yoga is the practice of the truth of which knowledge gives the vision, and its practice has for its motor power a spirit of illumined devotion, calm or fervent consecration to that which knowledge sees to be the highest. But what are the truths of Sankhya? So I think it's quite clear here. He first explains the, the normal sense that people use the word Sankhya and Yoga. Then he explains the way the Gita approaches Sankhya and Yoga, and that Aurobindo sees that the Gita sees that there is no incompatibility between the two. However, Sankhya proceeds, the starting point is different. Sankhya proceeds from knowledge to realization, to work, and the yoga that of the Gita proceeds to works. Now, both Sankhya and Yoga, both in the wider sense, used and are part of the Gita's yoga. But in which sense? Catholic, universally true, the larger principles, not its narrow, trenchant ideas. So here then, Sri Aurobindo explains in what sense Sankhya and Yoga are both taken up in the Yoga of the Gita. But what are the truths of Sankhya? The philosophy drew its name from its analytical process. Sankhya is the analysis, the separative, discriminating the principles of our being, of which the ordinary mind sees only the combinations and results of combination. Sankhya sets forth the principles of our being, of which the ordinary mind sees only combination and results, through the separative, discriminative process. Its original, it did not seek at all to synthesize. So what Sankhya does not seek to do is to synthesize everything. It only discriminates, separates, and brings forth the principles of our being. Now, its original standpoint is in fact dualistic, not with the very relative dualism of the Vedantic schools, which call themselves by that name, Dvaita, but in a very absolute and trenchant fashion. So the original standpoint of Sankhya is dualistic, but not in the form of the way we look at Dvaita in the Vedantic way, but in a very trenchant, what should I say, absolute way. For it explains existence not by one, but by two original principles, whose interrelation is the cause of the universe. So how is existence explained? Through Purusha, the inactive, and Prakriti, the active. Purusha is the soul, not in the ordinary or popular sense of the word, but of pure conscious being, immobile, immutable, and self-luminous. Prakriti is energy and its process. Purusha does nothing, but it reflects the action of energy and its processes. Prakriti is mechanical, but by being reflected in Purusha, it assumes the appearance of consciousness in its activities. And thus there are created those phenomena of creation, conservation, dissolution, birth and life and death, consciousness and unconsciousness, sense knowledge and intellectual knowledge, and ignorance, action and inaction, happiness and suffering, which the Purusha, under the influence of Prakriti, attributes to itself, although belong not at all to itself, but to the action or movement of Prakriti alone. So this is the way that the Sankhya Yoga explains the universe as two principles, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the soul, Prakriti is the moving energy. However, Purusha, because it's passive, tends to reflect the movements of Prakriti, and it seems as though it is Purusha that is actually being attributed these things, but in fact it is not. It is only a passive what should I say, mover of Prakriti. So for Prakriti is constituted of three gunas, or essential modes of energy. Sattva, the seed of intelligence, conserves the workings of energy. Rajas, the seed of force and action, creates the workings of energy. The seed of inertia and non-involves what they create and conserve. So these are the three. Now this is all the Sankhya system that is being explained here. Are you all with me? Lost? Is lost? Please say so. Or if any questions arise, please stop me. When these three powers of the energy of Prakriti are in a state of equilibrium, which are the three powers of this of Prakriti that are in a state of equilibrium? Yes. When these are in equilibrium, all is in rest. There is no movement, action, or creation. And there is therefore nothing to be reflected in the Purusha. The Purusha, something can only be reflected in the Purusha when Prakriti is in disequilibrium, when there is a movement. Yes? So, when these three powers of the energy of Prakriti are in a state of equilibrium, all is in rest. There is no movement, action, or creation. And there is therefore nothing to be reflected in the immutable, luminous being, that is the Purusha of the conscious soul. But when the
Amita,
equilibrium is disturbed.
Amita,
Yes,
I had a quick
sorry, go ahead.
question. What does it mean by Prakriti being reflected? How does Prakriti reflect in Purusha? What is that reflection?
How does Prakriti reflect in Purusha means what?
It means we are reading here again and
Here
again.
it says Purusha does nothing, but it reflects the action of Prakriti. So Prakriti's action is, Purusha is a passive being that is a reflector of Prakriti. When Prakriti is made of the three gunas, when Prakriti is in disequilibrium, its movements are reflected onto Purusha, as though it is Purusha who is doing, but actually Purusha is not doing anything. This is the Sankhya Yoga.
So Purusha is like a mirror. Is that what it is? That the Purusha is a mirror to Prakriti?
You could say so. Yes.
It's like a battery,
No. Prakriti is the energy that powers everything. What is Purusha? Is the mirror. Is like a mirror. It reflects. So anything that is passive and reflects. So everything is, you see, it's because of its stillness and passivity, it does not initiate action. It is Prakriti that initiates all creation, energy, movement, and it is the three gunas of Prakriti that are attributed towards, who actually create this movement. And Purusha is the still self, So when there is a Purusha and Prakriti in us also, no? The soul and its. So what do you do in meditation? You go back into the Purusha, of your own Purusha, which is your still witness self. And what does the still witness self do when it is not self-conscious or self-aware? It actually reflects Prakriti. Correct. So it gets identified as correct. Yes. Yes. Because of its identity, it forgets
Thank you.
itself and identifies itself. Perfect. Yes. That's
Okay, that's
so
clear.
this forgetting of ourselves, it also happens in all of us. No, we forget ourselves and identify with our outer movements, with anger, with our mind, with our mental movements, with our vital troubles. So the Purusha and Prakriti principle works as the same way in the individual as it works in the universe. So why does it identify itself with the Prakriti? Because it is unconscious and unaware and self-aware. Yeah. So therefore, why does the Sankhya, what does the Sankhya yoga do? It helps you to become conscious of the Prakriti, of the Purusha. How does it help you to become conscious of the Purusha? Right? Samadhi, through the mind, the stillness of the mind, and does it through the by disassociating. So therefore you have to give up the world and its movements and action and works and everything to be able to stay in that state, because otherwise as soon as you enter back into Prakriti, the Purusha again becomes involved and identifies. This is the method of Sankhya yoga. Now there is also now the yoga of Patanjali and the yoga of the Gita, and then there's all the other yoga. Right? So, for Prakriti is constituted of three gunas or essential modes of energy. Sattva, the seed of intelligence, conserves the working of energy. I've read that. But when the equilibrium is disturbed, then the three gunas fall into a state of inequality in which they strive with and act upon each other, and the whole inextricable business of ceaseless creation, conservation, and dissolution begins, unrolling the phenomena of the cosmos. So the cosmos is created, conserved, all of this happens because of the disequilibrium of Prakriti, of the gunas of the Prakriti of nature. So this continues so long as the Purusha consents to reflect the disturbance, which obscures his eternal nature. So the moment he consents to reflect this disturbance of Prakriti, of the three gunas, it obscures his eternal nature, his true self, and attributes to it the nature of Prakriti due to identification with Prakriti, right? But when he withdraws his consent of what consent? Consent to when he becomes aware of himself. Therefore, he withdraws his consent to reflect and to identify. The gunas fall into equilibrium, and then the soul returns to its eternal, unchanging immobility. So the way to, for that's why this is called the yoga of escape, because the way to do it is to go into complete equilibrium. That is, you stop all kind of uh, relation with Prakriti. Because if the only way that Purusha can become its own true nature is by the gunas falling into equilibrium, it is the disequilibrium that creates. Creation is because of disequilibrium. Energy and dissolution and continuity, all of that happens because of this disequilibrium of the three gunas. The moment you make it into equilibrium, what happens? You have to get out of creation in your consciousness. That means you have to rise above. You have to go into a state of trance or samadhi or whatever you want to call it. Moksha, whatever. Nirvana. Anyway, so the gunas fall into equilibrium and the soul returns to its eternal, unchanging immobility. It is delivered from phenomena. So this is why it is a precarious state. As long as you are in samadhi and you are there, you're completely aware of the true Purusha, the universal self. The moment you enter into Prakriti, into the world, you become part of the disequilibrium of the world, and you lose that sense of universality. Kaivalya. Extinction. Prakriti. But yes, but that's when you're living. But what happened when you die? You go back. So there is the ultimate goal of it then goes to back to moksha because you want release from birth and death. You don't want to come back. So Kaivalya is when you're alive, that you stay in that state of stillness. But yeah, or consciousness. But then after that, your ultimate aim is that you don't want to get back into the cycle of birth and death. So this is what our yoga, the Hindu. I mean, this has been our main ways of doing it through several practices, and there is some value in this in the sense of being able to do this is always, it's not easy, it's a very strenuous yoga. So if you can do it, there is value in that to be able to be in that state. So let us continue. Anyway, this reflection and this giving or withdrawal of consent seem to be the only powers of Purusha. So this reflection and this giving or withdrawal of consent, giving of consent or withdrawal of consent, seem to be the only powers of Purusha. He is the witness of nature by virtue of reflection and the giver of the sanction of the Gita, but not actively the Ishvara. Even his giving of consent is passive, and his withdrawing of consent is only another passivity. Very important, please note. All action, subjective or objective, is foreign to the soul, to the Purusha. It has neither an active will nor an active intelligence. It cannot therefore be the sole cause of the universe, of the cosmos, and the affirmation of a second cause becomes necessary. Not soul alone by its nature of conscious knowledge, will and delight is the cause of the universe, but soul and nature are the dual cause, a passive consciousness and an active energy. So the Sankhya explains the existence of the cosmos. So that is why um, it has to have it has a dual mode. It cannot explain the existence only by explaining the role of the Purusha. It has to have the role of the Prakriti and nature are the dual cause, passive consciousness and an active energy. And so only can the Sankhya explain the existence of the cosmos. Otherwise, why would there be a cosmos? Why is there a universe? What is the use? How did it come into being? So to explain that, it uses the dual principle of Purusha and Prakriti. But whence then come this conscious intelligence and conscious will, which we perceive to be so large a part of our being, and which we commonly and instinctively refer not to the Prakriti but to the Purusha? So this question then Sri Aurobindo asks, whence then come this conscious intelligence and conscious will, which we perceive to be so large a part of our being, and which we commonly and instinctively not to the Prakriti, but to the Purusha. According to the Sankhya, this intelligence and will are entirely a part of the mechanical energy of nature and are not properties of the soul. So, this conscious intelligence and conscious will that we perceive as a large part of our being is explained in the Sankhya philosophy, not we attribute it to the Purusha. That this is the action, this is the Purusha we are feeling. But Sankhya philosophy says no, it's not the Purusha, it is still the Prakriti. According to the Sankhya, this intelligence and will are entirely a part of the mechanical energy of nature, Prakriti, and are not properties of the soul. They are the principle of buddhi, one of the 24 tattvas, the 24 cosmic principles. Prakriti, in the evolution of the world, bases herself with her three gunas in her as the original substance of things, unmanifest, inconscient, out of which are evolved successively 5 elemental conditions of energy or matter. For matter and force are the same in the Sankhya philosophy. So these are called by the names of the 5 concrete elements of ancient thought: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. But it must be remembered that they are not elements in the modern scientific sense, but subtle conditions of material energy and in their purity in the gross material world. So here, according to the Sankhya, this intelligence and will are they are a principle of there are properties of not Purusha but Prakriti, and are the principle of Buddhi. And Prakriti, in the evolution of the world, bases herself with her 3 gunas in the which are evolved successively 5 elemental conditions of energy or matter, which are for matter and force, are the same in the Sankhya philosophy. These are called the 5 elements, which we've just read, but it must be remembered that they are not elements in the modern scientific sense, but subtle conditions of material energy and nowhere to be found in their purity in the gross material world. So these tattvas or these 24 tattvas and these 24 cosmic principles, out of which these 5, these are, they are the subtle. Yeah, you want to say a few things on it? They'll see it. We'll share it in the group later. So this for Anuradha has shared a lovely overview of the Sankhya philosophy, which I will share on your WhatsApp group so that you can have a look at it later. It's very useful as a diagrammatic view of what we are reading. Here we are. I have shared that so you can see it on the WhatsApp. Okay. Right. So this is a bit dense, so we have to bear with it. But I think if you get the sense of it, then once you study it and read it again, please. Yeah. Well, they have. They're all looking at it right now. Hmm. Yeah. So, yes, it's quite clear. Hmm. Is taking place. Manifested themselves in the growth. Yeah. So that I think. What Anuradha is saying is that in the Sankhya philosophy, this is how evolution takes place from the subtle to the gross. To the gross, and therefore Aurobindo here is mentioning that don't think that these 5 elements are science, but these are the elements from which all of the materialization of matter takes place, and different combinations and permutations take place from these 5 elements and these 3 gunas and so on. Okay, are we still there? Yes.
Your audio's a little bit like
I'm breaking. Okay.
you're more than breaking. You can slow down and speed
Right.
up.
So let's
and
continue.
Maybe take your video off,
Right.
and then that takes away a little bit of a strain. No, she went fully. If you have a weak Wi-Fi and you just keep the video off and talk, it helps. You're muted.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, and see me, whatever.
So
Yeah.
far, so good. Yeah.
Yeah, today's been a breaking day. Right. Where were we? Yeah, all action, subjective or objective, is foreign to the soul. Is it? We were here? Yes.
Top of 73 somewhere, right?
Oh, we were? Okay. Um,
Where?
yes, I think end of that.
Hmm.
Prakriti in the evolution of the world bases herself with her three gunas in her as the original substance of things, unmanifest, inconscient, out of which are evolved successively five elemental conditions of energy or matter. The matter and force are the same in the Sankhya philosophy. These are called by the names of the five concrete elements of ancient thought: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. But it must be remembered that they are not elements in the modern scientific sense, but subtle conditions of material energy and nowhere to be found in their purity in the gross material world. All objects are created by the combination of these five subtle conditions or elements. Again, each of these five is the base of one of five subtle properties of energy or matter: sound, touch, form, taste, and smell, which constitute the way in which the mind sense perceives objects. Thus, by these five elements of matter put forth from primary energy, and these five sense relations through which matter is known, is through which matter is known, is evolved what we would call, in modern language, the objective aspect of cosmic existence. So, the objective aspect are what we see as cosmic existence, comes from a combination of these five elements of matter put forth from primary energy and these five sense relations through which matter is known. So, which are the five sense relations? Sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. So, and from there, it is what we call the objective aspect of our cosmic existence is created. 13 other principles constitute the subjective aspect of the cosmic energy. What are the other 13 principles which constitute the subjective aspect of cosmic energy? Buddhi or Mahat, Ahankara, Manas, and its 10 sense functions, 5 of knowledge, 5 of action. I think that's given in that diagram which I saw. You could refer to it. So these are the 13 other principles which constitute the subjective aspect of cosmic energy. So what is cosmic energy? The Sanskrit word? Prakriti. Prakriti. Huh? Moola Prakriti, which is the original Prakriti, the root. Mool means where the original source. Yeah. So from that, so this Prakriti is also constituted of 13 other principles, which are Mahat or Buddhi, Ahankara, the ego or the separative sense, Manas, of course, the different, the mind and all the, sensory thing, and its 10 sense functions, 5 of knowledge, 5 of action. Manas or mind is the original sense, which perceives all objects and reacts upon them. So it perceives objects and reacts upon them, for it has at once an inferent and an efferent activity. Receives by perception what the Gita calls the outward touches of things, bhaya sparsha, and so forms its idea of the world and exercises its reactions of active vitality. But it specializes its most ordinary functions of reception by aid of the 5 perceptive senses of hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell, which make the 5 properties of things their respective objects, and specializes certain necessary vital functions of reaction by aid of the five active senses, which operate for speech, locomotion, the seizing of things, ejection, and generation. So uh, this is how the cosmic energy or Prakriti in its original source, you know, evolves or brings down onto its material plane, manifests, yeah, self in different what should I say, levels, yeah, of densifications of different levels of material manifestation. Now, these are very philosophical things, but anyway, we're trying to put them. So, is that clear to our friends here? Yes. Any issues there, Meenakshi and Guru? Okay. Yeah.
It's like in a sense organs. If you look at the sense organs, that's a subjective aspect. So if you have, for example, eyes,
Hmm.
the property of the eyes is sight. And so that's the landmark there. And then for that, the element
Hmm.
is manifested is fire.
Fire. Yeah.
So each of the senses is connected to a
Faculty.
is connected to the element.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, this reminds me a lot of Vladimir. Okay. So, right. So yes, so this is of course an explanation of Sankhya to us, and very technical but extremely useful because it explains there's a truth behind it, and which Sri Aurobindo picks up the universal truths of it, and then explains it in the context of the Gita and how the Gita picks it up, and then obviously when you read the shlokas, these will be referred to in the yoga of the intelligent will. So let's continue. But it specializes its most ordinary functions of reception by aid of the five perceptive senses of hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell, which make the five properties of things, their respective objects, and specializes certain necessary vital functions of reaction by aid of the five active senses, which operate for speech, locomotion, the seizing of things, ejection, and generation. Buddhi, the discriminating principle, is at once intelligence and will. It is that power in nature, which discriminates and coordinates. Buddhi nashat pranashati. So, these now here he explains each of these functions because these are very important, uh, you know, principles, and you will see why in the Gita and how in the Gita this comes in the shlokas that Sri Krishna and the knowledge that Sri Krishna gives to Arjuna for the practice of this yoga. Okay, so the second principle after manas is buddhi, and that is the discriminating principle. So this discriminating principle is very important because it discriminates the false from the true and so on. Ahankara, the third principle, the ego sense, is the subjective principle in buddhi by which the Purusha is induced to identify himself with Prakriti. So Ahankara, now we all want to know what is this ego. A little more about Anuradha, but Ahankara, the ego sense, is the subjective principle in buddhi. So the subjective principle in buddhi is called Ahankara, the ego sense, and that, what does it do? By which the Purusha is induced to identify himself with Prakriti and her activities. But these subjective principles are themselves as mechanical, as much a part of the inconscient energy as those which constitute her objective operations. So what is important to know is that these subjective principles are also mechanical. They are not conscious. They are not conscient. They work in a mechanical fashion. That's why constantly when you are working on the sublimation of one's own ego, or to understand the ego. Constantly, it's a work that never ends, because there is that you have to develop consciousness in oneself, which is not inherent, because they are mechanical in their nature, as much a part of the inconscient energy as those which constitute her objective operations. Whose objective operations? Prakriti's. If we find it difficult to realize how intelligence and will can be properties of the mechanical inconscient and are themselves mechanical jada, we have only to remember that modern science itself has been driven to the same conclusion. Even in the mechanical action of the atom, there is a power which can only be called an inconscient will, and in all the works of nature, that pervading will does inconsciently the works of intelligence. What we call mental intelligence is precisely the same thing in its essence as that which discriminates and coordinates subconsciously in all the activities of the material universe. And conscious mind itself, science has tried to demonstrate, is only a result and transcript of the action of this inconscient. Yeah, you.
So one thing is that when you're talking about mechanical, it's that there are certain laws that are already operational. So if there's something that's like anger, now so anger has its own laws of sequential reactions, which until you become conscious of it, will play itself out. So just like science, all this quantum physics that they're talking about, the fact that there is an observer consciousness.
Yes.
Otherwise, everything is going on its own. So it's very similar to this idea, right?
Yeah.
That there is the observer, Purusha is the observer. Unless the observer is consciously intervening in the movement of nature's mechanical process.
Which it cannot do unless it does yoga, unless through the process, because by nature it is inconscient
So that's
and mechanical.
if you just get into it, it's not caused by the laws of that particular
Correct,
reality.
correct.
So when you step out and step out, that's exactly
Can you all hear? No. Could you hear?
No.
No. Fine. But are you all with it? Yeah, you understand what's going on? The sense of it?
Kind of, yes.
Hello?
Kind
it,
of.
Okay. Kind of. Okay, any questions? Or shall we continue? All right. So, but Sankhya explains what modern science leaves in obscurity. Now, modern science is also saying that in the atom there is a conscious, there is a will and there is an intelligence. And it's also saying that will and intelligence seems to be inconscient, but it can't explain what it is. Now, Sankhya is explaining that. So let me read that again. What we call mental intelligence is precisely the same thing in its essence as that which discriminates and coordinates subconsciously in all the activities of the material universe. And conscious mind itself, science has tried to demonstrate, is only a result and transcript of the mechanical action of the inconscient. But Sankhya explains what modern science leaves in obscurity, the process by which the mechanical and inconscient takes on the appearance of consciousness. So what modern science leaves in obscurity, Sankhya explains, which is the process by which the mechanical and inconscient takes on the appearance of consciousness. And how does it do it? It is because of the reflection of Prakriti in Purusha. The light of consciousness of the soul is attributed to the workings of the mechanical energy, and it is thus that the Purusha, observing nature or Prakriti as the witness and forgetting himself, is deluded with the idea generated in her that it is he who thinks, feels, wills, acts. Like we are in the same happy state as the atom and the Purusha Prakriti in the universe are, because we think it is I who work, it is I who think, it is I who am the doer. It is my action that is producing uh, the result. And we do not, because we have identified ourselves with our prakriti, our mechanical, uh, the parts of energy in our being. So this is what Sri Aurobindo here is saying, that Sankhya philosophy explains why this happens, because of this identification and passive reflection of the Purusha, of Purusha's identification of Prakriti and passive reflection of her movements, which therefore make one Purusha think that it is I who am doing it, and our individual ego and individual self thinking that I am the worker. I am the doer. I am the initiator of all action. I am the copyright holder of this invention, and so on and so forth, and all the patents that I have got. So, you see, the thing is that as long as we are living in this um, what should I say, identification with the Purusha, with the identification with Prakriti and the principles of Prakriti, Ahankara being one, Buddhi being another, all of these are Prakriti. We do not imagine that Buddhi is a principle of Purusha. It is not. Purusha is only identified passively and with him is. And therefore, has taken over the, the soul, the conscious soul. We do yoga. Why is the yoga is conscious? The process by which one between the Purusha and the Prakriti and self, and not with the. That is why all of this is being explained here. Mm, right, but Sankhya is very dense. Here we go. But Sankhya explains what modern science leaves in obscurity, the process by which the mechanical inconscient takes on the appearance of consciousness. It is because of the reflection of Prakriti in Purusha, the light of consciousness of the soul is attributed to the workings of the mechanical energy, and it is thus that the Purusha, observing nature as the witness and forgetting himself, is deluded with the idea generated in her that it is he who thinks, feels, wills, acts, while all the time the operation of thinking, feeling, willing, acting is conducted really by her and her three modes, Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, and not by himself at all. To get rid of this delusion is the first step towards the liberation of the soul from nature and her work. From nature, from Prakriti and her works, is to get rid of this delusion of being identified passively and completely, and reflecting her and imagining it's I, me. Okay, so here Purusha is acting, rather unconsciously, say, right? There are certainly plenty of things in our existence which the Sankhya does not explain at all, or does not explain satisfactorily. But if all we need is a rational explanation of the cosmic processes in their principles, as a basis for the great object common to the ancient philosophies, the liberation of the soul from the obsession of cosmic nature, then the Sankhya explanation of the world and the Sankhya way of liberation seem as good as and effective as any other. So if our basic objective is to understand and to liberate the soul from its obsession with cosmic nature, then the Sankhya explanation of the world is as good and as effective as any other. What we do not seize at first is why it should bring in an element of pluralism into its dualism by affirming one Prakriti but many Purushas. Now, this is extremely important. Why does it talk about many Purushas? You see, there is a Purusha in the universe, there's a cosmic Purusha, there's an individual Purusha, there is a Purusha in every single animate object. Why so many Purushas in the Sankhya philosophy? Why not just one Purusha? Now, here we see the limitations of understanding, of all the limitations of this philosophy, but we should read it. What we do not seize at first is why it should bring in an element of pluralism into its dualism, because the dualism is Prakriti and Purusha. But now it says many Purushas. It would seem that the existence of one Purusha and one Prakriti should be sufficient to account for the creation and procession of the universe. But the Sankhya was bound to evolve pluralism by its rigidly analytical observation of the principles of things. First, actually, we find that there are many conscious beings in the world, and each regards the same world in his own way and has his independent experience of his subjective and objective things, his separate dealings with the same perceptive and reactive processes. If there were only one Purush, there would not be this central independence and separativeness, but all would see the world in an identical fashion and with a common subjectivity and objectivity. But we find instead that each of us has our own original way of believing, perceiving, and relating to the world. So that is why in Sankhya philosophy, the Sankhya, whoever they were, they had to introduce the idea of many Purushas to explain this difference. If there were only one Purush, there would not be this central independence and separativeness, but all would see the world in an identical fashion with a common subjectivity and objectivity. Because Prakriti is one, all witness the same world. The world is the same. We all witness the same world. But our way of witnessing the same world is different. Therefore, the idea of separate, so many Purushas. Because the principles are everywhere the same, the general principles which constitute internal and external experience are the same for all. But the infinite difference of view and outlook and attitude, action and experience and escape from experience, the difference not of the natural operations which are the same, but of the witnessing consciousness, are utterly inexplicable, except on the supposition that there is a multiplicity of witnesses, many Purushas. So to explain why every one of us has a different outlook, a different attitude, a different action, experience, and escape from we have a different goal. How do you explain such differences in goals, in attitudes, in worldviews, and so on? The only way to do that was to bring in the idea of many Purushas, multiplicity of witnesses or many Purushas. The separative ego sense, we may say, is a sufficient explanation. But the ego sense is a common principle of nature and need not vary. So the separative ego sense is a common principle of nature and need not vary. So and each of us has a separative ego sense, but there is a variation of this ego in our separative ego sense. How do you explain that? But the ego sense is a common principle of nature and need not vary. For by itself, it simply induces the Purusha to identify himself with Prakriti. And if there is only one Purusha, all beings would be one. joined and alike in their egoistic consciousness. However different in detail might be the mere forms and combinations of their natural parts, there would be no difference of soul outlook and soul experience. The variations of nature ought not to make all the central difference. This multiplicity of outlook, and from the beginning to end, this separateness of experience in one witness, one Purusha. So, the variations of nature ought not to make all the central difference. This multiplicity of outlook, and from beginning to end, this separateness of experience in one witness, one Purush. Therefore, the pluralism of souls is a logical necessity to a pure. This pluralism of souls is a logical necessity to a pure Sankhya system divorced from the Vedantic elements of the ancient knowledge which first gave it birth. The cosmos and its process can be explained by the commerce of one Prakriti with one Purusha, but not the multiplicity of conscious beings in the cosmos. Okay, so what does this mean? Another.
The talk of Ekam Sarvitra point of the There is one fundamental thing which becomes a Brahman in the Vedanta. That is the Vedantic concept.
Yes, source of this, yes.
This we have required a multiplicity of the Purusha.
Correct.
Why? Because it has diversity of subjective experience of life.
Of life, yeah. So this diversity of subjective experiences of life in the Sankhya philosophy has necessitated many Purushas, while the Vedantic philosophy believed only in one Purusha and one Prakriti. One consciousness. What is it was to call it what? Satta Brahman, yeah. Correct. The Vedantic was on the Brahman. From the Brahman came Maya and Brahman, yeah. Creation. So this idea of several Prakriti, Purushas and one Sankhya. Okay. And it is one Brahman and manifestation, which is whatever Maya. So, are you still there? Yes. There is another difficulty quite as formidable. Liberation is the object set before itself by this philosophy as by others. This liberation is effected, we have said, by the Purusha's withdrawal of his consent from the activities of Prakriti, which he conducts only for his pleasure. But in some, this is only a way of speaking. The Purusha is passive, and the act of giving or withdrawing consent cannot really belong to it, but must be a movement in Prakriti itself. If we consider, we should see that it is, so far as it is in operation, a movement of reversal or recoil in the principle of buddhi, the discriminative will. Buddhi has been lending itself to the perceptions of the mind sense. It has been busy discriminating and coordinating the operations of the cosmic energy, and by the aid of the ego sense, identifying the witness with her works of thought, sense, and action. It arrives by the process of discriminating things at the acid and dissolvent realization that this identity is a delusion. It discriminates finally the Purusha from Prakriti and perceives that all is mere disturbance of the equilibrium of the gunas. The buddhi, at once intelligence and will, recoils from the falsehood which it has been supporting, and the Purusha, ceasing to be bound, no longer associates himself with the interest of the mind in the cosmic play. The ultimate result will be that Prakriti will lose her power to reflect herself in the Purusha. For the effect of the ego sense is destroyed, and the intelligent will, becoming indifferent, ceases to be the means of her sanction. Necessarily, then, her gunas must fall into a state of equilibrium, the cosmic play must cease, the Purusha return to his immobile repose. But if there were only the one Purusha, and this recoil of the discriminating principle from its delusions took place, all cosmos would cease. As it is, we see that nothing of the kind happens. A few beings among innumerable millions attain to liberation or move towards it. The rest are in no way affected, nor is cosmic nature in her play with them one whit inconvenienced by this summary rejection, which should be the end of all her processes. Only by the theory of many independent Purushas can this fact be explained. That when, you see, it's quite clear, right? This is quite clear. So, okay. So if everybody is feeling saturated, then we can take it up next time. Are you all with me? Shall we? I think we should end now. So let's
Yeah.
take this up next time. Yeah. Please read this for yourselves, because if you don't, it does require a deeper reading and a second reading, and then we can take this particular point. Okay. But it's quite funny and quite fun, you know. It's quite logical, actually, what Sri Aurobindo is saying, and that's why it creates many Purushas, because otherwise we can't explain why the world hasn't dissolved. Okay. Very good evening, good day. We were reading the chapter on Sankhya and Yoga. I thought we'll start from page 74 with again, the explanation of Purusha and Prakriti in the Sankhya system, and then proceed to the Yoga systems that Sri Aurobindo explains. Especially in light of some of the questions that came, might be useful to revise this. Mom, I think you sit here, or I'm going to ask you to leave.
What page did you say?
Page 74.
Thank you.
So we'll start from the beginning of page 74, from the second line. But Sankhya explains what modern science leaves in obscurity. Has everyone got that line? Okay. But Sankhya explains what modern science leaves in obscurity, the process by which the mechanical and inconscient takes on the appearance of consciousness. It is because of the reflection of Prakriti in Purusha. So, Sankhya explains what modern science leaves in obscurity, which is what? The process by which the mechanical and inconscient takes on the appearance of consciousness, which means that how does mechanical energy take on the appearance of consciousness when it is inconscient? And it explains it by saying, it is because of the reflection of Prakriti in Purusha. The light of consciousness of the soul is attributed to the workings of the mechanical energy. And it is thus that the Purusha, observing nature as the witness and forgetting himself, is deluded with the idea generated in her that it is he who thinks, who feels, wills, acts, while all the time the operation of thinking, feeling, willing, acting is conducted really by her and her three modes, and not by himself at all. To get rid of this delusion is the first step towards the liberation of the soul from nature and her works. So basically, here Sri Aurobindo explains why what science has not been able to explain, which is that the Purusha um, observing nature or Prakriti as the witness forgets. So this operation of thinking, feeling, acting, because because the Purusha thinks that it feels, thinks, and acts, it gets deluded and begins to identify with Prakriti. And this identification causes the delusion of the ego and the act and therefore the whole mesh that we get ourselves into. So the operating sentence here is to get rid of this delusion is the first step towards the liberation of the soul from nature and her works. So how do you get rid of this delusion? By separating the Purusha from the Prakriti. And this is the first step towards the liberation of the soul from Prakriti and her works. Okay, so often he uses nature and Prakriti, the same as synonyms. There are certainly plenty of things in our existence which the Sankhya does not explain at all, or does not explain satisfactorily. Now, please note this: Sankhya system is not the. There are problems with the Sankhya philosophy. There are things that the Sankhya system does not explain, and therefore it is important to see its shortcomings.
Amita,
If all we need, however, if all we need, okay, so let's see. Now, tell me if this is better and you can hear me.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Okay, great. There are certainly plenty of things in our existence which the Sankhya does not explain at all, or does not explain satisfactorily. Okay. But if all we need is a rational explanation of the cosmic processes in their principles as a basis for the great object common to the ancient philosophies, the liberation of the soul from the obsession of cosmic nature, then the Sankhya explanation of the world and the Sankhya way of liberation seem as good and as effective as any other. So what he's saying here is that, look, why are we going towards the Sankhya philosophy? Why are we, what is the utility of adopting the Sankhya system? Then that is, if you want the liberation of the Purusha, the soul, from the obsession of Prakriti, of cosmic nature, which is Prakriti in general, then the Sankhya explanation of the world and the Sankhya way of liberation seems as good and as effective as any other. Now, what is the Sankhya way of liberation? It's an important question. The Sankhya way of liberation is when the Purusha begins to separate itself and realizes and does not become identified and does not mirror Prakriti. That means the movements of nature of the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and the operations of feeling, willing, thinking, doing, blah blah blah, are seen to be done by nature, Prakriti, and the will or the Purusha uh, is silent, passive, and can separate itself. This, in effect, allows us to become allows us to separate and differentiate between the outer nature and the inner self with a capital S. So that is what the Sankhya philosophy is really aiming to do, and that is the utility of it. Okay, is that clear? Are you able to hear me clearly now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay. So if any questions, please stop me. What we do not seize at first is why it should bring in an element of pluralism into its dualism by affirming one Prakriti but many Purushas. It would seem that the existence of one Purusha and one Prakriti should be sufficient to account for the creation and procession of the universe. But the Sankhya was bound to evolve pluralism by its rigidly analytical observation of the principles of things. So then the question arises, why did the Sankhyas have to bring in this pluralism rather than the dualism? Dualism is one Purusha, one Prakriti. Why did Sankhyas want to have one Prakriti but many thousand million Purushas? And there's a reason for it. it would seem that the existence of one Purusha and one Prakriti should be sufficient to account. But the Sankhya was bound to evolve pluralism because of its rigidly analytical observation of the principles of things, because it is going by a very rigid, analytical, logical system by which the mind or the witness self, the self in the being, can separate itself from the doer and what is being done. Yes.
So, like, the bee is mirrored with some attributes, and so it can communicate in various combinations.
Correct.
But isn't it also one level, one?
Now, your question is absolutely valid, and we will come to it. So she says Prakriti, she says, is made of 3 different modes and in permutation and combination, but isn't Purusha one? Now, Purusha is one in another system of yoga, which is the yoga system. But in Patanjali's yoga system or in Patanjali's yoga system, someone corrected me, but not in the Sankhya system. So in the Sankhya system, there is no one Purush. There are several Purushas.
So, all of the soul, how many according to one supreme
Being.
Yeah.
In the Sankhya system, apparently not.
Okay.
But we will read that. Actually, it comes up 2 pages later. So let's just wait for that. He explains it very clearly. Okay. It would seem that the existence of one Purusha and one Prakriti should be sufficient to account for the creation and procession of the universe. But the Sankhya was bound to evolve pluralism by its rigidly analytical observation of the principles of things. First, actually, we find that there are many conscious beings in the world, and each regards the same world in his own way and has his independent experience of its subjective and objective things, his separate dealings with the same perceptive and reactive processes. If there were only one Purusha, there would not be this central independence and separativeness, but all would see the world in an identical fashion and with a common subjectivity and objectivity. Because Prakriti is one, all witness the same world because her principles are everywhere the same. The general principles which constitute internal and external experience are the same for all. But the infinite difference of view and outlook and attitude, action and experience and escape from experience, a difference not of the natural operations, which are the same, but of the witnessing consciousness, are utterly inexplicable except on the supposition that there is a multiplicity of witnesses, many Purushas. It's very clear. So, according to its logical system of the Sankhya philosophy, I think Monk needs to out. It is very clear that there are, because there is because there are different worldviews, different ways, different experiences of various each conscious being or each being. Therefore, there are different Purushas witnessing, experiencing, and what should I say? Looking at Prakriti or nature in different ways. Because of that, we cannot say there's only one Purusha. Now, he's talking about the Purusha here in the Sankhya system as the Purusha that is in the world, the cosmic Purush, and the cosmic Prakriti. So he says there's only one cosmic Purusha as far as the Sankhya system is concerned. But there are there's thousands of cosmic Purushas in the Sankhya system. That means each one of us has our own Purush, our own self, which witnesses our world separately and differently to your world and to her world. However, the world that we witness is the same. Prakriti still works through her 3 gunas. Prakriti has not changed. The 3 gunas are not 3 gunas for me and 7 gunas for you and something else for you and something else. It's still tamas, rajas, and sattva. And it's tattvas, the 24 principles and so on. So this is why he is in the Sankhya system. So please first understand, this is a particular philosophy that we are studying. It's not trying to put everything into one box. There are different philosophical systems. Each has its own practical use. Okay? But the ego sense, however, the separative, so there's a multiplicity of witnesses, many Purushas. The separative ego sense, we may say, is a sufficient explanation. But the ego sense is a common principle of nature, need not vary. So all of us have the ego, all of us have which means that we all have a separation between the separative principle of the ego. The ego principle is in everybody. So therefore, you can't say, because of that, we have only one Purush. There are 1,000 different Purushas, but the ego sense is a common principle of nature and need not vary. For by itself, it simply induces the Purusha to identify himself with Prakriti. And if there is only one Purusha, all beings would be one. So what does the ego principle do? How does it actually function? It simply induces the Purusha, the self. It simply induces you to identify yourself with Prakriti. That means the functioning of nature in you, through the three gunas. Okay, and the way you feel, the way you think, you presume it's your way of thinking, your way of feeling, your emotions, your thoughts, your actions. So why do you feel that these are your own? Because of the separative ego principle. Okay, which this ego sense is what uh, sort of is a common principle of nature. For by itself, it simply induces the Purusha to identify himself with the Prakriti. But however, this is a common principle of Prakriti, not of Purusha. Nature is Prakriti. So please note that. And however, if there was only one Purusha, then what would happen? If there were not many selves, cosmic selves or individual selves or whatever selves, if there is only one Purusha, all beings would be one, joined and alike in their egoistic consciousness. However different in detail might be the mere forms and combinations of their natural parts, there would be no difference of soul outlook and soul experience. However, we see in our practical life that there is a difference of soul outlook and soul experience. And how do we explain this difference of soul outlook and soul experience? We can only explain it through this, through this one Purusha, through these how different Purushas working through one Prakriti. So the variations of nature ought not to make all this central difference. This multiplicity of outlook and from beginning to end, this separateness of experience in one witness, one Purusha. Therefore, the pluralism of souls, pluralism of Purushas, is a logical necessity to a pure Sankhya system, divorced from the Vedantic elements, which is what the Vedantic elements is the one Brahman Purush which comes, yeah, of the ancient knowledge which first gave it birth. So even the Sankhya philosophy actually came down from the Vedantic principle. However, to explain how nature works, how the world works, why we human in the cosmic consciousness, in the cosmos, how this and to help us to separate ourselves from Prakriti. This Sankhya system came up with this very rigidly narrow and therefore limited outlook. It is limited. So you have to understand it, but however, see also its limitations, but also why it was there. How can it help us to, how can it help? And it was set out as a system to help in the liberation of the soul, liberation of Purusha from Prakriti. Which Purusha from Prakriti? Yes, our own Purusha from Prakriti. And therefore, there had to be thousands of Purushas because your Purusha, yourself, is different from myself. Our evolutionary outlook. Yes. No, that awareness is not liberation. It is the actual cessation of identification with Prakriti and cessation of mirroring Prakriti. That is liberation. So, the cosmos and its process can be explained by the commerce of one Prakriti with one Purusha, but not the multiplicity of conscious beings in the cosmos. So the cosmos itself can be explained by the commerce of one Prakriti with one Purusha, but not the multiplicity of conscious beings in the cosmos. So to explain why there's so many conscious beings, for that we require many Purushas and one Prakriti. Okay. I think it's quite clear. Everybody else there online? Okay. There is another difficulty quite as formidable. So now he comes to another difficulty. Liberation is the object set before itself by this philosophy, as by others. This liberation is effected, we have said, by the Purusha's withdrawal of his consent from the activities of Prakriti. So when the Purusha withdraws his consent from the activities of Prakriti, then the Purusha is liberated. Now, who is the Purusha? The self, the divine being, the divine self in one's in the individual being, in the individual consciousness. So when the Purusha withdraws, uh, this liberation is effected by the Purusha's withdrawal of his consent from the activities of Prakriti, which he conducts only for his pleasure, but in some, this is only a way of speaking. The Purusha is passive, and the act of giving or withdrawing consent cannot really belong to it, but must be a movement in Prakriti itself. Now, this is the other difficulty, that it says that Purusha withdraws its consent, or Purusha is, what should I say, from the activity of Prakriti. But however, he says, Purusha is passive. So even this act of giving or withdrawing consent really belongs to Prakriti. If we consider, we shall see that it is, so far as it is an operation, a movement of reversal or recoil in the principle of buddhi, the discriminative will. Buddhi has been lending itself to the perceptions of the mind sense. It has been busy discriminating and coordinating the operations of the cosmic energy, and by the aid of the ego sense, identifying the witness with her works of thought, sense, and action. So he says, however, if you go deeper, you will see even this act of giving or withdrawing consent is really the buddhi that is doing it. It is not even the Purusha that's doing it. Why? Because the buddhi has been lending itself to the perceptions of the mind sense, the mental, sensory, the mind sense, the manas. It has been busy discriminating and coordinating the operations of the cosmic energy, and by the aid of the ego sense, identifying the witness, the Purusha, with her works of thought, sense, and action. It arrives by the process of discriminating things at the acid and dissolvent realization that this identity is a delusion. So, because of this process of discriminating between the doer and the uh, uh, and that which does, because of this ego sense discriminating, that it does not refuses to identify with the ego sense, it arrives by the process of discriminating things at the acid and dissolvent realization that this identity with Prakriti is a delusion. It discriminates finally the Purusha from Prakriti. And who discriminates? The Buddhi, remember. So the Buddhi finally discriminates the Purusha from Prakriti and perceives that all is mere disturbance of the equilibrium of the gunas. So the buddhi at once intelligence and will recoils from falsehood. So it is the buddhi that recoils from falsehood. It is the buddhi that through the discriminating process perceives that all is mere disturbance of the equilibrium of the gunas. And therefore, this buddhi, which is the manas, which is very, very close or very um, misjudging it to be the Purusha. Okay, so it has been this buddhi at once, intelligence and will, recoils from the falsehood which it has been supporting, and the Purusha, ceasing to be bound, no longer associates himself with the interest of the mind in the cosmic play. And then what happens? The Purusha ceases to be bound by this, by Prakriti, because of the discriminating action of the buddhi, and therefore ceases to get interested and loses interest with and no longer associates himself with the interest of the mind in the cosmic plane.
Belief is something that dissipates information tries to solve problems with discriminating analyzing on. Consciousness, as per the right of the answer, is something that absorbs, can see. But now when we read this, it is consciousness does it, but it's also more than it has to separate itself from what it is thinking or feeling by realizing that.
Yeah, but the word is not consciousness, it's Purusha. Or buddhi or discriminating mind, whichever one you want to use. Because if consciousness is actually, that's a problem with language. You have to be very careful what you use. Uh, uh, Otherwise, you'll get into further, deeper confusion. So we'll just keep straight to this text. That's why I don't want you to read anything, any other commentaries written by anybody else. Because if you do that without fully understanding this first, and then you can later on look at it, there will be confusion. Yeah? Okay. The ultimate, so here we are. At once, intelligence and will recoils from the falsehood which it has been supporting, and the Purusha, ceasing to be bound, no longer associates himself with the interest of the mind in the cosmic plane. Now, see, it no longer associates with what? What does the Purusha no longer associate with? What does it mean, interest of the mind? Buddhi. See, Sri Aurobindo has a way of using synonyms very happily. So you may lose track of what he's saying. You have to remember. Okay? So the Purusha actually no longer associates himself with the buddhi in the cosmic mind. Only then can it separate itself. While that is something that really requires a kind of process of yoga, of tapasya. That's why these are very disciplined processes that take a lot of time, and they are, that's why you say tapasya. Now, in ancient times, yogis used to sit and do tapasya for days and years and centuries. I mean, millenniums, come back and go to the Himalayas, leave life, refuse to engage in life. That was the reason. But how do you do this living in life? In the midst of that's why this yoga is a yoga of what? What is this a yoga of? Of the mind, is through the mind, but what is it a yoga of? Of a separation and a disengagement with life. While the Gita's yoga is not that. We'll come to that later. Okay. However, the Gita uses the Sankhya principles of discrimination in the yoga of the intelligent will. The Buddhi's discrimination is used to be able to bring some sort of separation between Prakriti, nature, gunas, and the soul. It uses this, but this itself is, has its limitations. Okay. For a complete yoga. So mind is, see, mind in English, the problem with mind in English is that it, tends to be, it is manas, what Sri Aurobindo is mentioning here. Because he's talking about buddhi, all the activities of buddhi and so on. So manas is a larger mind. Mind is buddhi is a part of manas. Yeah. Right. The ultimate result will be that Prakriti will lose her power to reflect herself in the Purusha. Now, when this happens, and the buddhi and the mind and the Purusha loses interest, no longer associates itself with the interest of the mind in the cosmic plane. Cosmic play is Prakriti. Then what happens is the ultimate result will be that Prakriti will lose her power to reflect herself in the Purusha, because the mind, the Purusha has what should I say? The buddhi because the Purusha has stopped uh, identifying itself with Prakriti. Okay. Right. The ultimate result will be that Prakriti will lose her power to reflect herself in the Purusha, for the effect of the ego sense is destroyed, because the ego sense comes with what? That I am separate from, that I am the doer, that I am the one that is responsible. I am the I, that the separate I, which is the small, the separate I is, like you could say, the ego principle, which identifies itself with Prakriti, which I call is the small self, the ego self, the desire soul, whatever words you want to call. In the Life Divine, he refers to it as the desire soul. That when it stops, uh, you know, it stops associating itself with the cosmic play and begins to understand that it is separate from, then what happens is the ultimate result will be that Prakriti will lose her power to reflect herself in the Purusha, for the effect of the ego sense is destroyed, and the intelligent will, buddhi, becoming indifferent, ceases to be the means of her sanction. Necessarily, then, her gunas must fall into a state of equilibrium. The cosmic play must cease. This is most important. How is liberation attained? By the cosmic play must cease. Complete equilibrium and disengagement from all of Prakriti, all of life, all the gunas, the cosmic and equilibrium. The cosmic play must cease. The Purusha return to his immobile repose, samadhi. So that is when you see the yogis living in samadhi. But if you, as long as you're in the state of samadhi, of immobile repose, you are completely aware that it is not, you're completely out of the ego. The ego does not come into your into play, because it is in equilibrium. However, because you have not really, now that comes later. We'll go into that later. Now, but if there were only the one Purusha, now again he goes back to the same thing, but if there was only one Purusha and this recoil of the discriminating principle from its delusions took place, all cosmos would cease. Suppose all our Purushas, ourselves, our individual jivas, our individual Purushas, which is, or the human, the Purusha in this, the higher self with a capital S, suppose they were all one, there was no differentiation. Then what would happen? If one person, if you attained liberation, all of us will attain liberation because we're all one. But that is why he says there are innumerable Purushas. Okay. But if there was only the one Purusha and this recoil of the discriminating principle from its delusions took place, all cosmos would cease. As it is, we see that nothing of the kind happens. A few beings among innumerable millions attain to liberation, or move towards it. A few beings move towards liberation. The rest are in no way affected. Okay? Nor is cosmic nature in her play with them one whit inconvenienced by this summary rejection, which should be the end of all her processes. So neither is cosmic nature or Prakriti in her play one whit inconvenienced by this summary rejection of the individual Purusha, which should be the end of all her processes. Only by the theory of many independent Purushas can this fact be explained. The only at all logical explanation from the point of view of Vedantic monoism is that of the Mayavada. But there, the whole thing becomes a dream. Both bondage and liberation are circumstances of the unreality, the empirical blunderings of Maya. In reality, there is none freed, none bound. The only at all logical explanation from the point of view of Vedantic monoism is that of the Mayavada. But there, the whole thing becomes a dream. In Mayavada, there is no bondage and there is no liberation. And both are circumstances of the unreality, the empirical blunderings of Maya. In reality, there is none freed, none bound. The more realistic Sankhya view of things does not admit this phantasmagoric ideal of existence, and therefore cannot adopt this solution of the Vedantic monoist, that there is nothing but Maya, that there is everything is an illusion. Liberation is an illusion, and life is an illusion. It does not accept this. And that the whole thing is one, there is none freed, none bound. Okay? So the more realistic Sankhya view of things does not admit this idea of existence and therefore cannot adopt this solution. Here too we see that the multiplicity of souls, the Purushas, is an inevitable conclusion from the data of the Sankhya analysis of existence. Okay? The Gita starts from this analysis and seems at first, even in its setting forth of yoga, to accept it almost wholly. Now, this is practical and from our point of view, very important. The Gita starts with this analysis. What analysis? That of the Sankhyas, okay? And so the Gita starts from this analysis and seems at first, even in its setting forth of yoga, to accept it almost wholly. It accepts Prakriti and her three gunas and 24 principles, accepts the attribution of all action to the Prakriti and the passivity of the Purusha. So the Gita starts from this passivity of Purusha, the activity of Prakriti, the gunas, and so on, the principles, 24 principles, and so on, accepts the multiplicity of conscious beings in the cosmos, accepts the dissolution of the identifying ego sense, that the ego sense dissolves, the discriminating action of the intelligent will, buddhi, and the transcendence of the action of the three modes of energy, gunas, as the means of liberation. So the Gita starts from this point, okay? The yoga which Arjuna is asked to practice from the outset is yoga by the buddhi. Now, buddhi is that part of the mind that is the discriminative mind. Okay, manas, part of it's clearer to use the word manas here. Is yoga by the buddhi, the intelligent will, what he calls one deviation of capital importance. What is the deviation? In this yoga of the intelligent will that Arjuna practices in the Gita, the Purusha is regarded as one, not many. Please note this. For the free, immaterial, immobile, eternal, immutable self of the Gita. But for one detail, is option of the eternal. Sorry? Oh, here we go again.
You're freezing again.
Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So, but the capital difference is that there is one and not many. This brings in the whole difficulty, which the Sankhya multiplicity avoids, and necessitates a quite different solution. This the Gita provides by bringing into its Vedantic Sankhya the ideas and principles of Vedantic Yoga. So, in the Gita, there is one Purusha. However, and this Purusha is the eternal, passive, immobile, immutable Purusha of the Sankhyas. Okay, however, but the capital difference is there is one and not many. Now, because there is one and not many, this brings in the whole difficulty which the Sankhya multiplicity avoids and necessitates a quite different solution. What is the solution? This the Gita provides by bringing into its Vedantic Sankhya the ideas and principles of Vedantic yoga. So there is a difference between two systems. Vedantic Sankhya, the Sankhya system, adopted by Arjuna, and the Gita is called Vedantic Sankhya, and it brings in the Vedantic yoga to to explain how it has still believes in the one Purusha and the many Purushas and Prakriti. So then it has layers, the Purusha on top, the three tires, and so on. So we'll go into that.
Draws from other philosophical systems and adapts them
To itself, yes, exactly. The Gita does draw from the Veda Sankhya system, the Yoga, and Vedanta, and it brings to it peculiar sense of its own and its own originality. Otherwise, why write another book? No, the scripture. You go back to the Sankhya system or Patanjali's system, or you go to the Vedas and the Upanishads. Why do you want the Gita then? So there is obviously the gospel. There is something else. So that, but it is a great synthesis. Yes, a combination. Much Vedas, Upanishads. The first important new element we find is in the conception of Purusha itself. Now listen to this. This the Gita provides by bringing into its Vedantic Sankhya the ideas and principles of Vedantic Yoga. Okay. Now what is this Vedantic Sankhya and Vedantic Yoga? The first important new element note we find is in the conception of Purusha itself. Prakriti conducts her activities for the pleasure of Purusha. But how is that pleasure determined? In the strict Sankhya analysis, it can only be by a passive consent of the silent witness. So in the strict analysis of Sankhya, Purusha, Prakriti can only conducts her activities for the pleasure of Purusha, um, and it can only do so by the passive consent of the silent witness, Purusha. Passively, the witness, Purusha, consents to the action of the intelligent will and the ego sense. Passively, he consents to the recoil of that will from the ego sense. He is witness, source of the consent, by reflection, upholder of the work of nature, Sakshi, Anumanta, Bharta, but nothing more. But the Purusha of the Gita is also the Lord of nature. He is Ishvara. So the Purusha of the Sankhya philosophy is the Anumanta Bharta, which is the Sakshi, the witness only, passive. However, the Purusha of the Gita is Ishvara, Lord of the nature. So he has a certain active being role. There is not just the passive Sakshi or witness self, but the Ishvara, the Lord. Now, if the operation of the intelligent will, which is the operation of buddhi, belongs to prakriti, belongs to nature, the origination and power of the will proceed from the conscious soul. Okay, so if you're saying that the buddhi belongs to prakriti, the intelligent will, but then it says that origination, that is the source of this intelligent will, where it originates from, and the power of that will proceed from the conscious soul, which is he is the Lord of nature, Ishvara. There it is. The source is Ishvara. This is how it brings in this distinction and change or difference from the Sankhya Yoga. The yoga here, the source of it is conscious. The intelligent will in buddhi is not conscious, it's prakriti. But where does the intelligent will emanate from? Where does it come from? And where does that will of the intelligent will of the buddhi come from? That is the Ishvara or the conscious soul. So, but the Purusha of the Gita is also the Lord of nature. He is Ishvara. If the operation of the intelligent will belongs to nature, that is, buddhi belongs to prakriti, the origination and power of this will proceeds from the conscious soul, that is, Ishvara. He is the Lord of nature. If the act of intelligence of the will is the act of prakriti, the source and light of the intelligence are actively contributed by the Purusha. He is not only the witness, he is not only Sakshi, Anumanta, Bharta, but what is he? He is not only the witness, but the Lord and the knower, master of knowledge and will, Jnata Ishvara. Jnata means from Jnana. He is the supreme cause of the action of Prakriti. He is the supreme cause of the action of Prakriti. Ishvara is the supreme cause of the action of Prakriti. The supreme cause of its withdrawal from action. Yes, is the doer. So then there are tires. See, there is the Purusha at the level of the self. Then there is the Purusha at the higher level of Ishvara. And then there is the Brahman, which is the highest level. So that's how this whole yoga comes in, the Vedantic yoga. Okay. So if the operation of the intelligent will belongs to nature, the origination, we read that. He is the supreme cause of the action of Prakriti, the supreme cause of its withdrawal from action. In the Sankhya analysis, Purusha and Prakriti in their dualism are the cause of the cosmos. In this synthetic Sankhya Purusha, by his Prakriti, is the cause of the cosmos. We see at once how far we have traveled from the rigid purism of the traditional analysis. So, let us continue. I'm going to not come back. I'm not going to explain too much here because he explains it himself. But what of the one self immutable, immobile, eternally free, with which the Gita began? What about what we call as in the Gita, what is the word for that? That is free from all change or involution, in change, avikarya, unborn, unmanifested, the Brahman. Yet it is that by which all this is extended. So, what about this one self, immutable, immobile, eternally free, which the Gita begins with, which is the Purushottam or the Brahman, uh, by which all this is. Therefore, it would seem that the principle of the Ishvara is in its being, if it is immobile. Therefore, it would seem that the principle of the Ishvara is in its being. If it is immobile, it is yet the cause and lord of all action and mobility. But how? And what of the multiplicity of conscious beings in the cosmos? They do not seem to be the Lord, but rather very much not the Lord. Anissa. For they are, Anissa is a part, for they are subject to the action of the three gunas and the delusion of the ego sense. And if, as the Gita seems to say, they are all the one self, how did this involution, subjection, and delusion come about, or how is it explicable except by the pure passivity of the Purusha? And whence the multiplicity? Or how is it that the one self in one body and mind attains to liberation, while in others it remains under the delusion of bondage? These are difficulties which cannot be passed by without a solution. So the Gita answers them in its later chapters by an analysis of Purusha and Prakriti, which brings in new elements very proper to a Vedantic yoga, but alien to the traditional Sankhya. It speaks of three Purushas, or rather a triple status of the Purusha. The Upanishads, in dealing with the truths of Sankhya, seem sometimes to speak only of two Purushas. There is one unborn of three colors, says a text. There's one text in the Upanishad, there's one unborn of three colors, says a text. The eternal feminine principle of Prakriti, with its three gunas, ever creating. There are two Purushas, of whom one cleaves to and enjoys her, the other abandons her because he has enjoyed all her enjoyments. In another verse, they are described in the Upanishads, a very famous verse of the Upanishads, as two birds on one tree, eternally yoked companions, one of whom eats the fruits of the tree, the Purusha in nature, in Prakriti, enjoying her cosmos, the other eats not, but watches his fellow, the silent witness, withdrawn from the enjoyment. When the first sees the second, and knows that all is his greatness, then he is delivered from sorrow. So when the first sees the second and knows that all is his greatness, then he is delivered from sorrow. The point of view in the two verses is different, but they have a common implication. One of the birds is the eternally silent, unbound self or Purusha, by whom all this is extended, and he regards the cosmos he has extended, but is aloof from it. The other is the Purusha involved in Prakriti. The first verse indicates the two are the same, represent different states, bound and liberated, of the same conscious being. For the second, unborn, has descended into the enjoyment of nature and withdrawn from her. For the second, unborn has descended into the enjoyment of nature and withdrawn from her. The second verse of the two birds, brings out what we would not gather from the former, that in its higher status of unity, the self is forever free, inactive, unattached, though it descends in its lower being into the multiplicities of the creatures of Prakriti and withdraws from it by reversion in an individual creature to the higher status. This theory of the double status of the one conscious soul or Purusha opens a door, but the process of the multiplicity of the one is still obscure. Now, this is pure philosophy we are reading, huh? I mean, I'm sorry, but those who may not be interested so much in this, but we are reading it, so may as well try and get a sense of what he's saying. Yes.
Sorrow is first,
Sorry?
it's sorrow delivered from sorrow, sorrow.
Sorrow? Delivered from sorrow, yes. Because he is not attached. He's not uh, one of the birds is eternally silent, by blah blah blah. Which one is it? Sorry? Yeah.
What is the greatness? Then is delivered from sorrow.
Yeah, but is aloof from it. The other is the Purusha. Yeah, as soon as you enter into the world, as soon as you are part of this cosmos and you're identified with Prakriti and nature, sorrow is a part of life. And the other one is not attached, is not identified with nature and Prakriti. So has no sorrow.
Mhm.
Right?
Mm.
Any
Hmm.
questions or comments or views or interpret or reflections on this? Jayashree, are you with us? Okay.
Yes, I am.
So is this clear?
Yes, it is clear. Thanks.
So for the second, unborn has descended into, okay, we finished that. This theory of the double status of the one conscious soul opens a door, but the process of the multiplicity of the one is still obscure. So this double status of the one conscious Purusha, the double status is the witness self, the source, and the one that is identified with Prakriti and is therefore subject to the workings of Prakriti. This certainly helps us. This double status of the one opens a door to understanding and to the the process of yoga and for the practical and to the practice of yoga. Okay, but the process of the multiplicity of the one is still obscure. What is obscure? This multiplicity of the one. This is not the multiplicity. He's talking about the two statuses, the double status, but not the now. Here you continue. To these two, the Gita, developing the thought of other passages in the Upanishads, Purusha, although the Akshara is supreme, there is a supreme Purusha higher than it, says the. Okay. Okay. So, to these two, the Gita, developing the thought of other passages in the Upanishads, adds yet another, the supreme, the Purushottam, the highest Purusha. So there is the Shara and the Akshara. The Shara is that which is identified with Prakriti. The Akshara is that is the bird that is watching the other bird, not identified, and therefore is free from the uh, pain, happiness, blah 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 of the world. And there's a third that the Gita brings in, which is the Purushottam, because that is the whole Gita's philosophy, which is the supreme Purusha. So that's why the triple tire, the supreme Purusha, the Purushottam, and then the Akshara and the Shara. To these two, the Gita, developing the thought of other passages in the Upanishads, adds yet another, the supreme it was, the Purushottam, the highest Purusha, whose greatness all this creation is. Thus there are three, the Shara, the Akshara, and the Uttama. Shara, the mobile, the mutable, is nature. Swabhav, it is the various becoming of the soul. Purusha, here is the multiplicity of the divine being. It is the Purusha, multiple, not apart from, but in Prakriti. Okay? So Shara is the mutable, the mobile, the mutable is nature, Swabhava. It is the various becoming of the soul. The Purusha here is the multiplicity of the divine being. It is the Purusha multiple, but multiple not apart from, but in Prakriti. Akshara, the immobile, the immutable, is the silent and inactive self. It is the unity of the divine being, witness of nature, but not involved in its movement. It is the inactive Purusha, free from Prakriti and her works. The Uttama is the Lord, the supreme Brahman, the supreme self, who possesses both the immutable unity and the mobile multiplicity. It is by a larger mobility and action of his nature, his energy, his will, and power that he manifests himself in the world, and by a greater stillness and immobility of his being, that he is aloof from it. Yet is he, as Purushottam, above both the aloofness from nature and the attachment to nature. So, this is the Gita's. This is the philosophical underpinning of the yoga of the Gita and the yoga of the intelligent will and the Gita's way of taking Arjuna to uh, to be the supreme uh, disciple. So that's why it's going through this thing, the Sankhya. Then from Sankhya we went to Patanjali's yoga, Vedantic yoga. Okay. Then what happened after that? Then we went to the Upanishads and found another. Now, how to explain this multiplicity? We've explained the dualism, that there's a Purusha and there's a Prakriti. We explained the cosmos and that has created the cosmos, and the interlinkings and the interchanging between them. Now, how do we explain all these multiple Purushas in this world? So we have to say, okay, in the Upanishads, there are not only the Purusha as Shara, which is the mutable one identified with Prakriti, but there's an Akshara Purusha. And beyond that, holding both together, having the qualities of both, and therefore you can make this world divine. And therefore works can be used. Otherwise, what is the idea of works? Works is Prakriti. What is the idea? Otherwise, you have to run away. If you didn't have the Purushottam holding both together, you would have a complete separation and a division right at the source. There is no division of the source. It is one, the Purushottam. And that is what holds both the Prakriti and Purusha, the Shara and the Akshara and everything that holds together. Okay? Ishvara is and Purushottam is not the same. Ishvara is the no. Ishvara is what? Give me the Ishvara is the what Purusha? No. What was the question you asked again?
I think Ishvara and Purusha, Purushottam and Ishvara
Are not the same because Ishvara is the Akshara Purusha. The Shara, Akshara Purusha can also be called the Ishvara. And then there is a Purushottam, which holds both together. Yes. So thus there are three. Let me read it again. The Shara, the Akshara, the Uttama. He calls them also, you can call it the Uttama. Uttama. Shara, the mobile, the mutable is nature, Swabhava. It is the various becoming of the soul. The Purusha here is the multiplicity of the divine being in the Shara state. The Purusha here is the multiplicity of the divine being. It is the Purusha multiple, not apart from, but in Prakriti. Akshara, the immobile, the immutable, is the silent and inactive self. It is the unity of the divine being, witness of nature, but not involved in its movement. It is the inactive Purusha free from Prakriti and her works. The Uttama is the Lord, the Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Self, who possesses both the immutable unity and the mobile multiplicity. It is by a large mobility and action of his nature, his energy, his will, and power that he manifests himself in the world, and by a greater stillness and immobility of his being that he is aloof from it. Yet is he, as Purushottama, both above both the aloofness from nature and the attachment to nature. This idea of the Purushottam, which though continually implied in the Upanishads, is disengaged and definitely brought out by the Gita, and has exercised powerful influence on the later developments of the Indian religious consciousness. It is the foundation of the highest Bhakti Yoga, which claims to exceed the rigid definitions of monistic philosophy. It is at the back of the philosophy of the devotional Puranas. So, the Gita is not content either to abide within the Sankhya analysis of Prakriti, for that makes room only for the ego sense and not for the multiple Purusha, which is there not a part of Prakriti but separate from her. The Gita affirms, on the contrary, that the Lord by his nature becomes the Jiva. So now listen to this. The Gita is not content either to abide within the Sankhya analysis of Prakriti. Why not the Sankhya analysis of Prakriti? Because for that makes room only for the ego sense and not for the multiple Purusha, which is there in this Sankhya Yoga, not a part of Prakriti. The multiple Purushas in the Sankhya system are separated from Prakriti. Purusha, Prakriti are separated. That the Gita does not accept. Is not happy with that. The idea that they are there, that there is a Purusha and Prakriti of the Sankhya for discrimination is acceptable. But that it is separate from Prakriti does not accept. What does it accept? The three-tier system. Akshara? Yeah. The Gita affirms, on the contrary, that the Lord Purusha, by his nature, becomes the Jiva. How is that possible, since there are only the 24 principles of the cosmic energy and no others? Yes, says the divine teacher, in effect. That is a perfectly valid account for the apparent operations of the cosmic Prakriti with its three gunas. And the relation attributed to Purusha and Prakriti there is also quite valid and of great use for the practical purposes of the involution and the withdrawal. But this is only the lower Prakriti of the three modes. The inconscient, the apparent. There is a higher, a supreme, a conscient and divine nature. And it is that which has become the individual soul, the jiva. So in the yoga of the Gita, there are two Prakritis. There is the lower Prakriti and there is a higher Prakriti, what we call as Para Prakriti and Prakriti. And that is how it explains this. The Gita affirms, on the contrary, that the Lord by his nature becomes the Jiva. How can the Lord by his nature become the Jiva unless the Lord by his nature, when he becomes it, is in the higher Prakriti, Para Prakriti. Prakriti, as it's seen in the world, as it's governed in the world, is Prakriti with the three gunas. Para Prakriti is above the three gunas. Try and understand that, if you will. Yeah. So Prakriti is. So how is that possible, since there are only the 24 principles of the cosmic energy and no other? Now, what are the 24 principles of the cosmic energy? Anyone? Yes, Robin?
No, I don't know. I've heard them, but I can't remember them. Sorry.
Right. So,
Jayshree would know.
Jayashree, any idea? I think somebody had posted them, hadn't they?
The 24 tattvas are,
Yes.
they deal also with the sound, ether, the principles. Actually, I'm trying to look for it. I have a note somewhere. I'm sorry, I can't say with the top of my head. I don't want to
So
say
here they
something
are.
wrong.
Okay. So I think if you look at the chart that was posted by me in the last class with which Anuradha had shared, there they are. If you count them all, I think they do come to 24. Um,
I think they came to 25, wasn't it, Anuradha? Something like that.
I don't know, but you can count them again. I haven't counted them, but
Yes,
I'm
yes,
just I'm just I'm just making, I mean, I just think that it has something to do with these, the sense organs and the active instruments,
yes,
and all of this that's written here. These are the 24 principles of 5 cognitive senses, 5 active instruments, 5 gross elements, 5 subtle elements, and so on and so forth. These are, the principles are given in these diagrams. So somebody can sort of count them whether they're 24 or not, but I think he's referring to these. Hmm? On the chart it says.
yes. It says
Maybe they
25
have included
tattvas.
something more here.
Yeah,
That
they
was
do the five sense organs, 5 organs of action, 5 tanmatras, and 5 mahabhutas, which make it 20. And then
24.
they add the mind
Yeah, I did
and
not add.
sattva, rajas, tamas, and that
Yeah.
makes it 24.
So I think when Aurobindo says 24 and not 25, I'm wondering whether this mind is really something you can put, yeah, whether we could put here or not. I don't know. This is, I think, the overview of the Sankhya, but maybe the way
Yes.
that in the 24, that the way that Sri Aurobindo is speaking about here may be slightly different from this, but we can go into, somebody can do a little bit of research perhaps for the next time on this particular topic. Um, I think that how is that possible, since there are only the 24 principles, the cosmic energy and no other. So he talked about 24 principles. So there may be a slight deviation from the Sankhya there, in the way that the Gita's 24 principles are enunciated.
Yes, especially in Google it says that somewhere there will be different 24 tattvas, not 25 tattvas, not 24.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a difference between the Sankhya. Anyway, people find out what is there's a, but it's a, you get the idea of it. Now, exactly what is the difference between, somebody can look it up. Okay. Yes, says the divine teacher in effect. That is a perfectly valid account for the apparent operations of the cosmic Prakriti with its 3 gunas and the relation attributed to Purusha and Prakriti. There is also quite valid and of great use for the practical purposes of the involution and the withdrawal. But this is only the lower Prakriti of the 3 modes. 3 modes? Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas. The inconscient, the apparent. Okay, so this is only the lower Prakriti of the 3 modes. The inconscient, the apparent. There is a higher, a supreme, a conscient, and divine nature. And it is that which has become the individual soul, the jiva. In the lower nature, each being appears as the ego. In the lower nature, in Prakriti. In the higher Paraprakriti, he is the individual Purusha. In other words, multiplicity is part of the spiritual nature of the one. So, in other words, now he's explaining this idea of multiplicity of Purusha. How do you explain that? So when you are looking at it in this way, where there are two prakritis, the lower and the higher, and in the lower prakriti, uh, um, it is the ego self, and in the higher prakriti, para prakriti, is the Purusha, okay, or the individual soul or the jiva. In the lower nature, each being appears as the ego. In the higher, he is the individual Purusha. In other words, multiplicity is part of the spiritual nature of the one. This individual soul is myself. In the creation, it is a partial manifestation of me. Mamaiva amsa, and it possesses all my powers. It is witness, giver of the sanction, upholder, knower, Lord. It descends. It descends into the lower nature and thinks itself bound by action. So this individual soul, which is myself, is in the creation, it is a partial manifestation of me, a anksh of myself. It's called mamaiva amsa, and it possesses all my powers. It is witness, giver of the sanction, upholder, knower, Lord. It descends into the lower nature, prakriti, and thinks itself bound by action, so as to enjoy the lower being. It can draw back and know itself as the passive Purusha, free from all action. It can rise above the three gunas and, liberated from the bondage of action, yet possess action, even as I do myself. And by adoration of the Purushottam, this is where the Bhakti Yoga comes, and by adoration of the Purushottam, the Uttama, and union with him, it can enjoy wholly its divine nature. Such is the analysis, not confining itself to the apparent cosmic process, but penetrating into the occult secrets of superconscious nature. Uttamam Rahasyam, by which the Gita founds its synthesis of Vedanta, Sankhya, and Yoga. So the Gita is a synthesis of three philosophical systems. What are the three? Vedanta, Sankhya, and Yoga. Vedanta starts from the Vedas, the Upanishads. Sankhya, the Upanishads, and Yoga, the Patanjali's Yoga. It's synthesis of knowledge, works, and devotion. By the pure Sankhya alone, the combining of works and liberation is contradictory. If you go by just the pure Sankhya philosophy or the Sankhya practice, combining works and liberation are contradictory because you have to actually separate yourself from life and works and prakriti. So you can't combine them. Therefore, it is impossible to do it in the Sankhya practice. By pure monoism alone, the permanent continuation of work as a part of yoga, an indulgence of devotion after perfect knowledge and liberation and union are attained, become impossible, or at least irrational and odious. By what? By pure monism. Monism. What is monism? Which philosophy is that? The Sankhya, sorry? Yeah. The Sankhya knowledge of the Gita, dissipates, and the yoga system of the Gita triumphs over all these obstacles. So it is the yoga system of the Gita that triumphs over all these obstacles, while the Sankhya knowledge of the Gita dissipates and the yoga system of the Gita triumphs. So basically what he's saying is that in this very unique system of the Gita, it uses the buddhi for discrimination, but is not bound by the buddhi and its limitations, and therefore introduces two other aspects. One of the Purushottam, the highest being, through which we go through by surrender and devotion and bhakti yoga, and the second by in the by works, by the idea of prakriti and para prakriti, the self or the purush that is sorry. Yeah. So that which can, the Ishvara, or that which can liberate itself in life through karma yoga, through works. That's how it brings in these three philosophies: the Sankhya, the Vedanta, the Sankhya, and the Yoga systems. And therefore, in the Gita, the yoga of the Gita, the world is not mithya. The world is not Maya. The world is not something that is bereft of the divine. The world embodies the divine in its cosmic principles, in itself. And therefore it is the three-tier systems. And all three are connected. And the two-tier, Prakriti and Para Prakriti, source of all Purushottam. So there is a connection, a complete unity in its multiplicity. It's or a multiplicity in its unity. And that is a system of synthesis of the yoga, of the Gita's yoga. Very, very uniquely, very unique to its scripture and to its practice, which is why the Gita's yoga is the most favorable and the one that is most practiced and most read by everybody who wants to practice any kind of spiritual discipline. It's a starting point of karma yoga, and then going on to bhakti yoga, and then jnana yoga. The three yogas are unified in its principles. So the Sankhya lends itself to jnana yoga. The bhakti yoga is from Purushottam, the devotion and love and surrender to the one. The Vedas, the Brahman. And the third, Karma Yoga, is from? Okay. Is very, very specific to the Gita. It brings it for the first time. Yeah. Correct. That is the whole idea of the Gita. It brings it for the first time. I mean, it's implied in the Upanishads. It's more, and it's there in the Vedas. But the Gita extracts it and brings it to its fullness with Sri Krishna and Arjuna's yoga. It's a yoga of work. Okay. Any questions or reflections or comments by anybody before we close? No.
Thank you for making this clear. It was a very confusing. It's very confusing to the common layman. When I read it, I didn't understand it at all. But thank you.
So has it made it slightly clearer?
Yes,
I hope so.
it's a lot clearer. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
It's important to have this clarity. It's very important. Thank
very
you.
much so. Thank you. Well explained.
Thank you. Yeah, very dense chapter, but it makes a lot more sense.
Sorry?
It's a very dense chapter. It makes a lot more sense now.
It's a lot?
Makes a lot more sense. It's
Yeah,
very
it's a very dense chapter.
dense.